Hey there, sleepless rabble. Let me take over for a while. Tonight, we're stepping into a shimmering glass palace, the very first World's Fair, where the tea pours itself, toast travels at lethal speeds, and fashion comes with a fire hazard warning. This is a story of brilliant disasters, of vibrating poultry, self heating hats, and the stubborn, slightly delusional belief that technology can fix everything, even you. So, if you're ready for steam, spectacle, and one very traumatized chicken, settle in. This is Napmax Sleep Stories, and you're listening to the great exhibition of nonsense, patented inventions, and grotesque progress. If you enjoy absurd history told very slowly, please give this story a like. Subscribe for more late night nonsense, and share it with someone who really shouldn't be trusted near a mustard cannon. And if you'd like to support what we do here, without strapping yourself into a moral corset, you can find us at kofi.com/napmax. Now tell me in the comments, which absurd invention would you proudly display in your living room? Or which one already lives there? Let's get into it. This is the story of a world fair so grand, so glittering, so full of hope, and also full of completely useless inventions. Welcome to the Great Exhibition of 1851, but not the one from your history books. Oh no, this is the one they didn't put in the guidebook. The one with the automatic tea swirler, the electro-moral corset, and the toast launcher that once broke a stained glass window in Westminster Abbey. So sit back, and let's begin at the beginning, with a building made of dreams, glass, and far too many sharp corners. It's May. The year is 1851. London is dressed up like it's trying to impress the entire planet. Because, well, it is. Queen Victoria and Prince Albert are hosting the very first World's Fair, and they've built a palace for it. Quite literally. A colossal greenhouse of iron and glass stretching across Hyde Park like an enormous crystal centipede. They call it the Crystal Palace. Modest, isn't it? Inside, they've stuffed everything the Empire has ever invented, copied, polished, or possibly misunderstood. Giant looms, dazzling fabrics, telescopes pointed at nothing, and pianos the size of boats, but hidden among the grandeur, tucked between the telegraphs and the Turkish rugs, lies a forgotten annex of human ambition, where creativity and common sense went on very separate holidays. And this is where we begin. It smells like brass polish, ambition, and overcooked mutton. Men in three-piece suits stroll past with monocles clenched in triumph. The ladies follow, politely fainting under the weight of their corsets and excitement. Somewhere, an American is loudly explaining that everything was invented in Boston. Someone else trips over a child-sized printing press. And then, there it is. A small stall, humble, polished, smelling faintly of lavender and burnt toast. Above it hangs a sign, Benedict C. Featherstone's automatic tea swirler, a revolution in British beverages. Beneath the sign stands a man with an impressive moustache and absolutely no shame. He gestures to his invention, a brass teacup on a rotating tray, powered by a tiny steam engine and absolutely incapable of stopping. The cup spins, the tea spills, the onlookers applaud. "Oh, marvellous," whispers a duchess, blinking tea from her eyebrow. "Finally, we've beaten the French." Of course, the tea swirler is just the beginning. To the left, a prototype of the Trompette du Soleil, a sunrise horn that blasts a cheerful note at dawn, regardless of where you are, or whether you have neighbours. Behind that, an early sketch for a dog-operated sewing machine, never produced due to lawsuits and confusion. And next to it, quietly humming with pride, sits the self-watering grave, a monument to optimism, or perhaps a deeply committed gardener. This is not the Britain you were taught in school. This is the backstage of innovation. The warm, ridiculous underbelly of an empire that believed anything was possible, including hats that heated your brain and horses with toothbrushes. And it's only day one. Tomorrow we'll take a stroll through the Hall of Agricultural Wonders, where chickens are rattled for science and moles are serenaded with bells. And let the automatic tea swirler do what it does best: spin, spill, and seduce the public with absolutely no function at all. Because just beyond this charming catastrophe of crockery awaits something far more ambitious. A hall devoted to agriculture where the inventions are louder, larger, and often traumatizing for chickens. Progress, they said, would feed the world. Mechanization would save time, labor, and the occasional finger. And nowhere was this bold vision more alive than in the Hall of Agricultural Wonders, a sprawling exhibition space nestled between the textile pavilion and the regrettable misfire that was the musical canon. The air was thick with the scent of oil, damp straw, and nervous poultry. Visitors wandered in, hopeful and wide-eyed, only to be confronted by a cacophony of whirring gears, low mechanical hums, and what could only be described as a go-in emotional distress. This was not a peaceful stroll through the future of farming. This was an assault on common sense and on several small animals. Let us begin, as all good disasters do, with the birds. Near the center of the hall, a gentleman with wild eyes and egg yolk on his lapel gestured proudly at his masterpiece, the poultry productivity enhancement apparatus, more commonly known among the traumatized as the vibrating chicken table. 12 wooden compartments, padded for comfort, were connected to a crank-powered mechanism. Once activated, the entire platform began to shake, gently at first, then less gently, then violently enough to unsettle the Queen's corgis 3 halls over. The theory was noble. Agitation stimulates egg-laying. The reality? 12 furious hens, no eggs, 1 black eye, the inventors, and a handwritten sign that read, "Do not touch while loaded." He called it innovation. The chickens called it Tuesday. The rest of us just stared in fascinated horror. A few steps away, another inventor had taken a different route, a gentler one, though no less absurd. His device? The glockenspiel mole deterrent. A brass contraption mounted directly into the soil, equipped with tiny hammers and tuned metal bars. Every 20 seconds it played a cheerful melody. God Save the Queen, Rule Britannia, or The Farmer in the Dell, depending on which lever one pulled. The inventor claimed the vibrations would drive moles away. There was no data, but an impressive collection of worms had gathered nearby, seemingly out of protest. A toddler clapped. A skeptical badger peered in from the hedgerow. The moles, we assumed, had simply gone deeper. And of course, it wouldn't be proper progress without something unnecessarily dangerous involving horses. In the far corner of the hall, beside a particularly sinister scarecrow with rotating arms, a brass and leather device sat atop a sawhorse. The sign read, "Electrodental Hygiene for Stabled Beasts." It was, regrettably, exactly what it sounded like. An electrically powered toothbrush designed for horses. To use it, one strapped the contraption over the animal's snout, connected the gear-driven motor, and braced for impact. During the demonstration, the horse sneezed mid-brushing, bolted sideways, and trampled an innocent cucumber slicer. The cucumber slicer survived. The presenter's dignity did not. Elsewhere in the hall, one could find the self-walking plough, which required 2 grown men to steer, 4 to stop, and had already made its way halfway into the nearby display of handcrafted hay wreaths. There was also the portable turnip sorter, which sorted absolutely nothing but made a satisfying clunk sound every few seconds, much to the delight of bored children. One particularly memorable invention, the milk collection corset, was quietly removed after an unfortunate misunderstanding involving a cow, a countess, and 3 very traumatized butlers. To be fair, not every idea was total madness. Some of them were only partial madness. A few had genuine potential, buried somewhere under the panic and poultry. But that's the beauty of this place. This great glorious disaster of innovation. Every inventor believed. Every visitor hoped. And every goat screamed. As we leave the Hall of Agricultural Marvels, feathers in our hair, hay in our shoes, and deeply confused about the mold situation, we hear the distant hum of something far more refined. It crackles softly, it glitters faintly, and it smells vaguely of hair oil and burnt velvet. Because next, we explore the intersection of technology and vanity, where hats are wired, waistcoats hiss, and a style is very much a fire hazard. If progress was the soul of the Great Exhibition, vanity was its mirror. Polished, perfumed, and mildly combustible. The Hall of Fashion and personal adornment shimmered with every colour that could be extracted from crush bugs, suspicious chemicals, or Victorian optimism. Rows of mannequins posed stiffly in gowns, bonnets, and suits too impractical for even the most determined duchess. But beneath the silk and starch, something dangerous ticked. Because here, in this perfumed chamber of style and self-expression, technology was stitched directly into the seams, and absolutely none of it had been tested for flammability. At the centre of the hall, beneath a canopy of embroidered parasols, stood the pièce de résistance, the thermal headwear series, or more accurately, the heated hat collection. Developed for the chilly upper classes and thin-scalped nobility, these hats featured built-in warming coils powered by a tiny chemical battery discreetly tucked under the brim. The effect was immediate, and in theory, delightful. Warmth, style, and status in one tidy package, until it rained. Then the wiring sparked, the felt ignited, and the first test subject, a footman with dreams of promotion, was seen running in circles, hat ablaze, before diving into a decorative fountain. He was unharmed. His dignity, less so. The inventor insisted it was simply a matter of adjusting the voltage. He was later seen rebranding the same hat as a portable kettle for the scalp. Nearby, an exhibit titled Gentleman Self-Ironing Waistcoat drew quite the crowd. Its inner lining was fitted with retractable brass rods, which, when heated by a coal cartridge in the back panel, would smooth out any wrinkles, assuming the wearer stood very still and didn't breathe. Unfortunately, one enthusiastic demonstrator attempted to activate it mid-speech. The rods deployed, the fabric tightened, and the waistcoat constricted with such force that he briefly resembled a well-dressed sausage. The audience applauded. Someone took notes. The waistcoat, to its credit, did remain crisp. But the award for most likely to cause an international incident surely belonged to the telegraph wig. A marvel of multitasking, this faux hairpiece was embedded with fine copper wires connected to a miniature Morse code transmitter. The idea was to allow discreet communication during balls, dinners, or particularly boring sermons. And it might have worked, if not for the antenna. Poking out from the top like a mechanical unicorn horn, the delicate wire tended to get caught on chandeliers, coat racks, and other people's opinions. Worse still, the signals were occasionally misdirected, resulting in one highly confusing afternoon where the Admiralty received a wig-based message about beef stew and unpaid debts. The Queen was not amused. Across the room, a series of handbags had been enhanced with built-in perfume diffusers, coin sorters, and, in one regrettable case, a miniature steam whistle to ward off street urchins. When activated, the bag let out a shrill shriek and released a puff of rose-scented steam, which was all very effective until the mechanism jammed and sprayed hot lavender oil directly into the face of a passing clergyman. He has since retired to the countryside. The handbag has been renamed the Widowmaker. In the ladies' section, one could admire the electro-moral corset, a stunning piece of undergarment engineering designed to tighten automatically when the wearer thought unwholesome thoughts. How it detected these was never fully explained, but it did respond to raised heart rates, flushed cheeks, and proximity to certain red-haired violinists. During one demonstration, the corset activated abruptly, reducing its wearer to a panicked whisper and cracking 3 ribs in the name of chastity. Her fiancé remained optimistic. The violinist fled the country. Fashion in the age of industry had become a battlefield, not of taste or elegance, but of survival. To dress boldly was to live dangerously. To accessorize was to risk combustion. And as we drift toward the end of this hall, past scarves that sing, gloves that buzz, and a monocle that claims to detect sarcasm, we cannot help but admire the sheer absurdity of it all. Because next comes the realm of domestic innovation, a place where the toast flies, the bookshelf rotates, and the household cat has its own alarm system. Home. Sweet, heavily mechanized home. In the Victorian imagination, the home was not merely a sanctuary. It was a workshop, a testing ground, a canvas upon which inventors, mostly men who had never actually cleaned anything, could project their boldest ideas for domestic improvement. The result was a glittering display of contraptions no one needed, solving problems no one had, in ways no one quite trusted. The Hall of Home Innovation was less a showroom and more a ticking time bomb of levers, springs, and brass fittings. It ticked, it steamed, it hummed ominously, and occasionally it shrieked. We begin with breakfast, because of course we do. Near the entrance stood a proud banner. Speed, precision, breakfast like never before. And underneath a display so horrifying, it attracted a safety officer and a priest. The automatic toast launcher. Its purpose? To eject 2 perfectly browned slices of toast into the air and directly onto the waiting plate. Its flaw? Velocity. The machine operated on a compressed spring system, which, when triggered, sent toast skyward at speeds once reserved for falcons and minor artillery. Early prototypes dented the ceiling. Later models achieved a liftoff and briefly disappeared from view. One piece landed in a decorative vase. The other struck a duchess squarely in the shoulder. She was reportedly more impressed than injured. Adjacent to the breakfast battleground stood something equally absurd: the self-filling teacup. Designed for ladies of delicate wrist, it featured a rotating arm attached to a central teapot, which, upon activation, tipped itself forward and poured the tea automatically. Unfortunately, the rotation mechanism lacked subtlety. The teapot would lurch forward, gush uncontrollably, and recoil as if in shame. Demonstrators began wearing aprons, and eventually, goggles. The inventor, a man with 2 sugar cubes lodged permanently behind his left ear, insisted it was merely a matter of training the pot to trust. The pot disagreed, but even these paled in comparison to the rotating bookcase for the chronically indecisive. A massive cylinder lined with books, mounted on a central axis, and powered by a foot pedal, One kick would send the bookcase into motion, spinning gently. Two kicks created a literary tornado. No fewer than 6 monocles were lost in the first demonstration. A seventh was later retrieved from the pages of Robinson Crusoe. The idea was to let readers feel inspired by the movement of knowledge. What they felt, mostly, was dizziness. For the pet owners, there was the cat lavatory alert gong, a walnut box with a bell mechanism triggered by feline movement. The purpose? To audibly announce when a household cat had used its private corner, allowing staff to promptly intervene. The unintended result? Constant eerie chimes echoing through otherwise silent parlors. One elderly baron declared it the voice of the ghost cat. Another threw it into a lake. The cat, unfazed, continued as usual, as cats do. In the corner near the mock fireplace stood a favorite of confused fathers everywhere, the child calming cradle with built-in lullaby cylinder. A rocking crib fitted with a hand-crank music box that played soothing melodies as long as someone stood nearby and rotated the handle. This, naturally, defeated the entire purpose of automation. But it did come with optional wax cylinders of Twinkle Twinkle Little Star and God Save the Queen, the latter being described as rousing but unhelpful at bedtime. One upgraded version included a motion sensor designed to play music when crying was detected. This proved disastrous during colic episodes and thunderstorms, which triggered a loop of lullabies until the mechanism finally broke under the weight of its own mercy. And finally, in a locked glass cabinet, sat an invention so questionable it had been banned from public demonstration: the soup spinner. The idea: a centrifugal device that ensured consistent flavor distribution by spinning hot soup at high speeds. The flaw: physics. It worked beautifully, until the lid came loose. Then it worked tragically. The soup reached the ceiling in under 2 seconds. The ceiling, to its credit, held. The inventor was last seen attempting to patent a soup umbrella. No one asked why. No one wanted to know. What tied all of these gadgets together wasn't practicality, or usefulness, or even basic functionality. It was hope. Glorious, misdirected hope. A belief that the home could be elegant and efficient, that teapots could pour themselves, that toast could fly. But as we step away from this buzzing, clanging gallery of domestic optimism, we hear something different, something moral, something judgmental. Because in the next hall, virtue isn't taught, it's mechanically enforced. If Victorian domesticity was ruled by etiquette, then this hall was its electric dungeon. A place where good manners were not taught, suggested, or gently encouraged, but mechanically imposed. Welcome to the Hall of Moral Correction, where technology meets temperance, and every improper thought comes with a light buzzing sensation. It began innocently enough, as most bad ideas do. A sign greeted visitors in fine gilded script, for the betterment of character and table manners. Beneath it stood a long dinner table, elaborately set with porcelain plates, polished silver, and a full mechanical monitoring system built into the tablecloth. At first glance, it appeared harmless. At second glance, you noticed the wires. This was the etiquette enforcement tablecloth, and its purpose was to ensure that every elbow remained off the table, every utensil held correctly, and every guest appropriately grateful. Sensors embedded in the lace monitored movement. Too much slouching? A discreet bell would ring. Elbows touching fabric? A small jolt, nothing too serious, just enough to make you drop your soup spoon. Gossip detected? Well, that triggered the centerpiece to hiss steam in silent judgment. One lady fainted. 2 men apologized to their mothers. No one touched the bread rolls again. Just beyond the judgmental table was an elegant armchair labeled simply, "The Chastity Lounger." It looked inviting enough. Cushioned, velvety, vaguely throne-like. But within its frame lurked a series of pressure sensors and a primitive galvanic battery. Its goal? To detect moral agitation in young ladies who sat too long near eligible bachelors. If a heartbeat exceeded a certain rate, or if the sitter fidgeted too much, the chair would begin to vibrate gently. If the symptoms persisted, it would emit a soft chime. If passion truly refused to be dampened, it released a cold puff of lavender mist, and locked the occupant in place for 30 minutes. The inventor described it as a temporary pause for reflection. The public described it as very awkward. At the far end of the hall, a rather severe man stood next to his magnum opus, the Virtue Corset 3000. This updated version of the electro-moral corset came equipped with a finely tuned moral compass, literal in fact, embedded in the lining. Any deviation from a true north, he claimed, was symbolic of a deviation from moral purity. At which point, the corset would tighten slightly. Further deviation meant further tightening. His assistant demonstrated the mechanism. The audience watched as her waist was gently compressed into oblivion. When asked how the compass could possibly know her moral state, the inventor replied, "The device has its ways," and then refused further questions. Children were not spared. Displayed next to a high chair and a book of cautionary rhymes was the screaming napkin. This innocent-looking linen, when placed on a child's lap, would monitor both volume and crumb trajectory. If the child shouted, spilled, or made any sound deemed unpleasant to the gentry, the napkin would emit a shrill whistle until silence was restored. In one demonstration, the napkin was activated by a sneeze. It screamed for 13 minutes before the batteries were removed with tongs. There was also the gossip-snuffing sugar bowl, designed to detect whispers at the table and respond by spinning rapidly, scattering sugar cubes in protest. The inventor claimed it encouraged honesty. In reality, it left most guests with bruised knuckles and unseasoned tea. And just beside it, a personal favorite, the moral thermometer, a long brass stick mounted discreetly in a parlor corner. The more sinful the room's conversation, the more the mercury was said to rise. No one could explain how it worked. But during one heated discussion about opera and trousers, the glass shattered. Perhaps the most disturbing exhibit, however, was the soul reflector. A looking glass said to reveal one's true inner self, complete with a dial that displayed your current virtue score. One brave gentleman stood before it. The needle pointed to mildly smug. His wife stepped up. The dial read, "Repressing fury." Then came a clergyman. The device simply hissed and shut itself down. It was removed the next morning, citing spiritual burnout. In the end, all of these inventions shared a singular belief that morality could be measured, corrected, and ultimately engineered. A shocking thought, quite literally. But as we step out of this hall, slightly twitching, emotionally dampened, and unsure whether our elbows are allowed to exist, we hear something entirely different. No buzzing, no hissing, just the faint, mechanical hum of something overhead. Because next, we leave the parlor behind and look up, to the sky, to the winged madness of flight. If man was meant to fly, he probably wouldn't have done it in a cravat. But the Victorians disagreed. In this wing of the exhibition, ironically located at basement level due to structural concerns, we find the soaring dreams of a society entirely unburdened by physics. The Hall of Aeronautical Advancement, or more accurately, the Room of Gravity Denial. The first thing you notice isn't the machinery, it's the optimism. Heavy, undeniable, slightly sticky. Posters line the walls, each one declaring victory over the skies, with ever more questionable slogans: conquer the clouds, soar like a modern Icarus, now with only limited concussion. And beneath those promises, the machines, dozens of them, wings, rotors, umbrellas, kites large enough to offend God, each crafted with the wide-eyed belief that if you simply flapped hard enough, you could escape the tyranny of walking. Let's begin with the most famous failure of all, the Steam Butterfly 5000. Constructed from polished copper, silk panels, and sheer audacity, this personal flight harness was designed to mimic the wing structure of a monarch butterfly. Unfortunately, butterflies are light, and this contraption weighed as much as a piano. The pilot, a wiry man named Edwin Featherbrace, strapped himself in with the confidence of someone who had never studied biology. He ran. He flapped harder. Then the steam engine activated and launched him sideways into the refreshment tent. 2 scones were lost. 3 ladies fainted. The machine was later used as a weather vane. Just across the aisle stood a magnificent disaster, the rotary Ascension umbrella, a folding parasol fitted with whirling blades and a counterweight basket for ballast. Invented by a hairdresser with a fear of carriages, it was intended to gently lift a person into the air and glide them over traffic. In testing, it lifted no one. What it did do was generate enough wind to blow every hat off in a 10-foot radius. The crowd applauded it anyway, mostly out of politeness, and partially because the inventor was now spinning uncontrollably and vomiting into a hedge. Then came the balloon trousers. A 2-piece ensemble with expandable air pockets stitched into the thighs, seat, and, somewhat ambitiously, the cravat. The concept was to achieve vertical lift via foot bellows, allowing the wearer to rise a few feet above ground, perhaps for apple picking or romantic gestures. Unfortunately, once inflated, the trousers became structurally unstable. During one demonstration, they lifted the inventor a total of 9 inches before one pocket ruptured, rocketing him into a pie stall. He was later seen limping, stained with cherries, declaring, "It simply needs more leg ballast." In the far corner of the hall sat a collection of lesser known, but no less dangerous, prototypes. The ornithopter waist harness, with flappable wings operated by arm pulleys, ideal for spraining shoulders and dislocating dreams. The pedal-powered Zeppelin, which could reach an altitude of 4 feet before gently collapsing onto anyone below. And the experimental avian saddle, designed to let particularly brave pigeons carry handwritten messages and very small children. It was never used for either. One invention stood out for sheer originality: the parachute for chickens, created by a retired naval officer with a deeply philosophical view of gravity. It was meant to allow poultry to be safely deployed from elevated positions. Why chickens would need this was unclear. What was clear? The demonstration involved dropping an unsuspecting hen from a modest scaffold, at which point the tiny silk parachute deployed flawlessly, and the chicken, offended but unharmed, landed in a basket of marzipan. The audience erupted in cautious applause. The chicken was later adopted by the Prime Minister's niece and named Victoria. And then there was silence. Not from reverence, but from the fact that someone had turned on the Ascension prototype. a noise-producing monstrosity made from recycled umbrella spokes and loud intentions. It did not fly, but it made a sound so shrill that the glass ceiling of the exhibition trembled. The hall was evacuated shortly after. There is something beautiful, though, in all this madness. These were not machines of war, not weapons, not tools of empire. These were dreams, bolted together with rivets and idealism. They crashed, of course. They always crashed. But in their spinning, flapping, undignified failure, they proved something strange and deeply human. We would rather fall with hope than stand still in doubt. And as the hall settles once more and the last feathers drift gently to the ground, we turn our eyes downward again. Not out of shame, but curiosity. Because next, we enter the kitchen. And in Victorian kitchens, the real chaos begins. There is a peculiar kind of madness reserved for kitchens. Not the culinary kind. That's forgivable. Creative, even. No, this is the madness of invention. The kind that asks, what if cooking involved more gears? What if we could fry things with steam? And most importantly, what if mustard could be weaponized? Welcome to the Hall of Culinary Innovation, where recipes are written in brass and your meal may fight back. The first exhibit is impossible to miss, mostly because it's still hissing. A polished display platform supports a proud sign: the modern man's breakfast station. Efficiency you can taste. And there it is. A 6-foot-tall, multi-level contraption of levers, burners, and rotating trays. The inventor, a mustachioed optimist with visible burn scars, beams as he explains its operation. At the top, a slot for bread. Slide in 2 slices. Pull the red lever. Wait. The bread is toasted, buttered, jammed, and, theoretically, deposited onto a ceramic plate via the precision toast drop mechanism, TM. In practice, the toast launches. 1 slice hits the table. The other lands inside a visitor's handbag. It remains there, gently steaming, until someone screams. Not to be outdone, the neighbouring stall features something billed as the future of hot beverages. It is, in fact, a tea-spinning infuser, a foot-operated platform where the teapot sits in the center, and the user rotates it with pedals to encourage flavor agitation. The idea, we're told, is that centrifugal force helps release the subtle notes of bergamot. The reality, tea everywhere. Everywhere. On the table, on the floor, in someone's shoe. A child cries softly. The inventor declares it a triumph of modern physics. Then comes something truly special. Something dangerous. The mustard delivery apparatus. It looks innocent enough, a porcelain pot with a small brass nozzle and a hand crank. But twist that crank and the inner chamber pressurizes, forcing mustard through a fine pipe at speeds previously reserved for fencing foils. It was, at one point, intended to be a centerpiece at elegant luncheons. Now it's kept behind glass. During testing, the stream of mustard reached 6 feet. At full pressure, it pierced a ham and embedded itself in a table leg. The table was unharmed. The ham was never spoken of again. Elsewhere, a group gathers around the rotating soup bowl, a concept born, according to its plaque, from the frustration of stirring. Here's how it works. Soup is ladled into the bowl. The bowl is mounted on a small turntable. A crank rotates the base. The soup spins, evenly distributing heat and flavor. Unfortunately, soup is not designed for velocity. At just 5 revolutions per minute, the bowl begins to slosh. At 10, it becomes a liquid tornado. At 15, it flings broth across the room in a wet, steaming arc. The soup technician is visibly exhausted. He offers paper napkins with the resigned grace of a man who's seen things. But the kitchen marvels don't stop at lunch. Enter the self-sorting cutlery drawer, an ambitious invention featuring magnetic channels, pressure sensors, and an incredibly complex set of miniature gates. Knives here, forks there, spoons, theoretically, in the middle. The floor. Everything metal behaves differently in motion. After 2 minutes, spoons pile up in the knife section. Knives slide into forks. Forks disappear entirely. A voice from the crowd mutters, "Witchcraft." No one disagrees. In the far corner stands a final, slightly trembling exhibit, the pie crust stabilizer. Designed to prevent crust shrinkage during baking, it consists of a set of adjustable metal arms that hold the edges of the pie in place while it cooks, which sounds reasonable, until you realize the arms must be inserted manually into a 400-degree oven. The resulting burns are called pastry scars. The inventor, still bandaged, refers to them as badges of honor. And through all this chaos, all the scalded sauces and mustard injuries, a strange truth emerges. They were trying, honestly, trying, to make life better, cleaner, faster, fancier. They believed kitchens should dazzle, that dinner should spin, that mustard should fly, and somehow, in the middle of all this absurdity, you admire them for it. Not because they succeeded, but because they thought they could. But as the scent of burnt toast and failure lingers in the air, we move toward another kind of innovation. Not mechanical, not edible, but deeply personal. Because in the next hall, Victorian medicine awaits, and it is deeply unqualified. There are many words one could use to describe Victorian medicine. Innovative, ambitious, lethally enthusiastic, but above all, it was confident, deeply, delusionally confident. Here, in the Hall of Therapeutic Advancement, the human body was treated less like a temple and more like a leaky engine in need of patchwork, poking, and pressurized gases. It was the golden age of tonic water, trepanation, and tuberculosis-themed spas. Doctors prescribed mercury like it was lemonade, and pain was considered not just a symptom, but often a solution. The first exhibit meets you with a faint whiff of camphor and regret. The vibratory chair for nervous conditions stands proudly at center stage. A deep mahogany recliner lined with what appeared to be brass bicycle chains and velvet upholstery. It hums, gently, threateningly. A lever on the right arm activates an oscillation mechanism beneath the seat, designed to realign nervous energies by shaking the patient at roughly the same frequency as a Victorian doorbell. Patients were advised to sit for 5 to 7 minutes, during which time their nervous system would allegedly settle into harmony. In reality, it jostled teeth loose, dislodged monocles, and caused at least one reverend to experience the Holy Spirit in a new and unpleasant way. The upgraded version offered variable speeds. The fastest setting was discreetly labeled Spiritual Awakening. It was discontinued after several women fainted with alarming enthusiasm. Just beside it, a far more sinister creation gleams under a copper spotlight. The mercury vapor inhalation box. At first glance, it resembles a wardrobe. At second glance, a coffin with ambitions. The user would step inside, close the hatch, and inhale measured doses of heated mercury vapor, meant to stimulate the lungs and rejuvenate the complexion. It did neither. What it did do was cause hallucinations, vomiting, and permanent confusion about the color blue. One man described seeing music. Another simply wandered into the tapestry hall and began preaching to a potted fern. The exhibit is sealed now, for safety and insurance. But perhaps the most crowd-pleasing device was the laughing gas enema. Yes, that's exactly what it sounds like. A narrow metal cylinder, a rubber hose, and a hand pump, all carefully engineered to deliver nitrous oxide via the most undignified route possible. Originally designed for melancholic patients unwilling to smile, the treatment guaranteed laughter, or at least high-pitched shrieking, within seconds. The official instructions advise the practitioner to warn the patient politely before activation. The unofficial advice: stand clear and make peace with your choices. On the opposite wall, something glimmers in restrained menace. A slim, polished box with 6 dials and a long cord. The Snore Zapper. Billed as a cure for marital disharmony, this device was placed under the snorer's mattress and connected to a small metallic plate tucked into the nightshirt. When snoring exceeded a certain volume, defined by a setting called unholy thunder, the plate would deliver a mild electric shock to the sleeper's spine. Further snores increased the voltage. Persistent offenders received what the inventor described as a moral corrective jolt. Users reported mixed results. One man stopped snoring permanently. Unfortunately, he also stopped sleeping, speaking, and trusting electrical outlets. And then there was the gastrointestinal alignment board, affectionately nicknamed the gut rack. It was a wooden table with 6 leather straps, a crank, and a series of adjustable rollers said to realign internal organs through graduated pressure and spiritual intention. Once strapped in, the patient would be rotated gently like an unfortunate spit roast, while the rollers applied inward encouragement. The effect? Burping, occasionally vomiting, rarely enlightenment. The inventor, a man with too many teeth and far too much enthusiasm, claimed the machine could cure everything from indigestion to despair. His patients mostly complained of dizziness, nausea, and a recurring sense of betrayal. And just when you thought it couldn't get more grotesque, you arrive at the electromagnetic spirit harmonizer. A steel helmet with antennae, dials, and what appeared to be a repurposed chandelier on top. The patient would don the helmet, lie on a copper mat, and allow the operator to tune their etheric field using a series of precisely calibrated electric pulses. According to its creator, this could cure night terrors, possession, and ghost-induced fatigue. According to literally everyone else, it hurt. A lot. One woman claimed she saw her dead grandmother. Another saw double for 3 weeks. A third removed the helmet mid-session and threw it into the koi pond. It fizzled for 10 minutes. So did she. But the pièce de résistance, hidden behind thick velvet curtains, was whispered about more than it was seen. The mood-stabilizing blood spinner. You sat in a chair. A small amount of blood was drawn. The vial was placed into a hand-cranked centrifuge. Once spun for 90 seconds, to shake off despair, the plaque read. The blood was re-injected into the opposite arm. The result? According to one testimonial, a brief feeling of warmth, followed by an overwhelming desire to lie down and reconsider everything. Which is also how most visitors describe this entire hall. There was no consistency here, no real science, only metal, wires, trembling optimism, and pain sold in gleaming brass packaging. But perhaps that was the point. In a time before antibiotics, before anesthesia, before anyone thought to ask, should we do this? There was only the desire to feel better. To hope, to trust, to try. Even if it meant vibrating chairs, even if it meant mustard enemas, even if it meant seeing your ancestors through a bucket of mercury steam. As we leave this medical mausoleum of misguided miracles, we enter a different hall, quieter, but no less absurd. Because now, it's time to explore the birth of modern advertising, and how the Victorians convinced each other to buy all this nonsense in the first place. You can invent the finest self-warming corset the world has ever seen. You can electrify toast, vaporize sadness, and shake a chicken into divinely inspired ovulation. But none of it matters if nobody buys it. Welcome to the Hall of Promotional Genius, where truth was gently massaged, side effects were tactfully ignored, and every invention, no matter how useless, was marketed with the confidence of a man in a hat that may explode. This was not just advertising. This was theatre, propaganda, delusion in print, and it was glorious. The entrance alone is a visual assault. Posters, handbills, broadsheets, banners, a wall of colour, ink, and questionable spelling. One reads, Dr. Haverley's syrup of invigoration for men, horses, and fainting furniture. Another, Professor Bellwhistle's steam-powered lung enhancer, now with less screaming. And beneath them, rows of booths manned by barkers, performers, and self-declared doctors with no medical training but exceptional moustaches. Take, for example, the booth of Professor Blenkinsop, who stood beneath a velvet canopy with gold tassels and shouted to no one in particular, Ladies and gentlemen, what if I told you your hair could return? That your bile could be balanced? That your mother-in-law might even grow fond of you again? He sold tiny bottles of a yellowish liquid. The label, Blenkinsop's Tonic of Elemental Harmony. Its listed ingredients included essence of turnip, atmospheric magnetism, and a whisper of Neptune's truth. One bottle was free with every spiritual consultation. 2 if you agreed to be publicly hypnotized. Several people fainted. 1 danced. 1 man claimed his kneecaps were speaking in Latin. It was declared a success. Further down the aisle, the stall for the Toast Launcher 3000 team featured a live demonstration, or rather, a reenactment, because the actual machine had been banned from indoor operation. Instead, an actor dressed as a Victorian gentleman would mime pulling a lever, and an assistant would dramatically hurl toast across the stage with a slingshot. The toast was pre-buttered, so were the assistants. The audience cheered regardless. The slogan? Speed, precision, dignity. None of which were ever actually delivered. Another particularly theatrical stall was hosted by a woman who called herself Madame Celestina, claiming to be a certified mesmeric technoseer TM. Her booth was covered in mirrors, candles, and rotating diagrams of the human soul. She offered soul readings, magnetic bracelet blessings, and one deeply confusing service called the etheric calibration of regret. Prices were flexible, outcomes were not. Her best-selling item? A perfume called Essence of Lunar Focus, said to increase intuition and reduce ankle swelling. Reviews were mixed. The bottle, however, was stunning. Carved glass, silver topper, and a label that glittered suspiciously in moonlight. One entire wall of the hall was reserved for the patent plaque showcase, where inventors could pin their official paperwork alongside flattering testimonials from imaginary customers. The electro-moral corset changed my life. I've not had a sinful thought since 1850. Anonymous widow. Before the mole glockenspiel, my garden was a battlefield. Now it is a cathedral of peace. Captain F. Wobblethorn retired. The mercury vapor box has brought me closer to heaven than any sermon. the Rev. P.H. Danderforth, not a single quote was verified. Not a single buyer complained. Because to complain was to admit you'd bought it. At the back of the hall, a small but busy booth quietly sold safety insurance for unpredictable devices. Their slogan was beautifully understated. If it spins, hisses, or glows, insure it. The clerk, a woman in grey with the steady expression of someone who had seen far too much, handed out tiny policies printed on red paper. One guest asked what was covered. She replied, "Not fire, not lawsuits, just dignity." He bought two, and perhaps the crown jewel of this commercial circus was the demonstration stage, where every hour, on the hour, a full theatrical performance would dramatize a new invention. One such skit involved a fake aristocrat, a rebellious toast slice, a moral corset malfunction, and a happy ending involving tea sprayed directly into a bystander's monocle. It received a standing ovation, and resulted in 3 actual purchases, of what no one could quite say. Marketing at the Great Exhibition was not about accuracy. It was about belief, about aspiration, about speaking loudly enough that people stopped asking questions. Because deep down, everyone here wanted to be convinced, to be cured, to fly, to sparkle, to vibrate their troubles away. And if a few lies made that dream easier to swallow, along with the tonic, well, that was simply the cost of modern life. But as the last advertisement flickers and the posters begin to curl under the weight of their own promises, we take one final turn. Not to the future, not to the fantastical, but to the exit, where the smell of burnt oil fades, the steam cools, and we ask, very gently, what it was all for. One more chapter. One last glance back at the madness. The steam has thinned. The banners droop slightly, like overworked cravats, and the once shrieking toast launcher is silent now. You've wandered through every ticking hall, past brass monstrosities and vibrating furniture, through clouds of lavender gas and the echoes of mustard-based trauma. And now, as the sun sets gently behind the Crystal Palace, painting the glass in streaks of gold and smoke, we reach the final exhibit, the gift shop. It sells nothing useful. Tiny models of the steam butterfly, complete with non-functioning wings, postcards featuring Victorian men screaming inside mercury boxes, t-shirts, yes, t-shirts, printed with the phrase, "I survived the Gockel Rutler." No one questions where the shirts came from. Some say they were invented early, others say they came back with the chicken parachute. In any case, the shirts are quite popular. But we're not here for souvenirs. We're here to say goodbye, not just to a place, but to an idea. A deeply ridiculous, deeply human idea. That progress, by definition, must make sense. It doesn't. Sometimes it spins in circles, sometimes it explodes into soup, sometimes it electrocutes your spleen while singing, "God Save the Queen." And yet, there's something almost sacred about it all. Because behind every unhinged device, every over-polished pipe dream, every perfectly pointless contraption, there was a mind, a hopeful one, a bit misguided, possibly concussed, but hopeful. They weren't trying to harm. They weren't trying to deceive. They were trying to help, to improve breakfast, to make corsets moral, to defeat moles using the power of jazz. That matters. And maybe, just maybe, the point wasn't whether it worked. Maybe the point was trying to fly, trying to be better. Trying to live in a world where your teapot can pour itself and your horse has minty breath. The Victorians believed in progress the way children believe in magic. Loudly, unquestioningly, and often with disastrous consequences. But is that really so bad? Is it worse than silence? Than stagnation? Than giving up? You reach the exit now. A small, brass-framed archway, flanked by faded posters of everything you've just seen. You look back once, just for a moment. The halls are still. The inventions rest. A chair buzzes faintly, as if remembering. A lone piece of toast lies on the floor, uneaten. Heroic. And as you step back into your world, a world of Wi-Fi and apps and warning labels, something follows you. Not the machines, not the madness, but the message. That maybe, just maybe, it's okay to fail. Gloriously, publicly, repeatedly. Because sometimes, in the smoking wreckage of a self-ironing waistcoat, you find something real, something human, something worth dreaming about. Good night, dear visitor of nonsense. Sleep gently. And if your dreams begin to vibrate, don't worry. It's probably just progress. And if this gently unhinged journey through history's strangest inventions made you smile or sigh or question everything you know about mustard, you can help keep the nonsense alive. Like the video. Share it with your fellow insomniacs. And if you want to support what we do, or just buy us a cup of metaphorical tea, you can find us at ko-fi.com Napmax. No vibrating corsets, no exploding hats, just sleepy stories. And you. This is Napmax Sleep Stories, and you've been listening to the great exhibition of nonsense. Good night. And may your toast always land butter side down.